All right, so without any further ado, I give you President and I believe Mrs. Washington.
Good evening.
Good evening.
8 long years we fought for our independence. Only by divine providence we won our independence. Close to 76,000 young men died on the various battlefields, from Lexington and Concord all the way to Yorktown. But little did we know the battle for independence really began when we started to form our new government. Of 8 years of combat, we only won 3 of those battles. They were the ones that counted. Trenton, Princeton, and Yorktown. After winning our independence, now what are we going to do? Are we going to have an emperor? Are we going to have a king? Who will lead our country? How will it be led? What document will we use to set up and establish our government? Those were questions we all had. As a new nation, we all make mistakes. Our biggest mistake was the Articles of Confederation. Not having a basic understanding of world government, not having an understanding of how the government was going to receive money to pay for the debts to France, to Spain, not having an understanding of how each state will rule itself, not having an understanding of how the federal government will collect taxes to pay those debts, were tremendous challenges for our country. But I am here tonight to inform you divine providence, who was with us at the beginning as we formed our new nation, was with us when we formed our new Constitution. The Articles of Confederation, an absolute disaster. The Articles require that each state gather taxes, take that money, and give it to the federal government. As you can see the folly in that. As my wife would always say, you're not going to receive 1 red cent from any of the states. They're going to keep the money themselves. Because each state realized that they had power, more power than the federal government. They did not have the power to raise an army. They did not have a power to collect taxes for other states. And so Massachusetts would be going against North Carolina. North Carolina would try to outdo Maine. Maine would try to outdo Pennsylvania. It was one state after another state trying to grab that power, and it was not working. The world was watching. France was watching. England was watching. What is going to happen to this new formed republic that Benjamin Franklin came out of that Continental Congress and looked those two ladies in the eye when they asked the question, "Mr. Franklin, what have you given us?" Madams, we have given you a republic if you can keep it. That's the challenge that we were facing. The Articles of Confederation would not be able to keep a republic. Divine Providence gave to us in Philadelphia a new Constitution of the United States of America that replaced the Articles of Confederation, and we could be thankful for Shays' rebellion. Farmers were hurting. Military men who fought with me as my lovely wife followed us through those 8 years there at Valley Forge. Newberry, there she was, tending to my soldiers. They fought hard, year after year without any money. Young men, 12, 13, 14 years of age, up against the most powerful nation in the world. And now the federal government has forsaken them. 90% were farmers. Each state started to raise taxes more and more because each state seemed like it was responsible for their own debts. But who was going to pay off the federal debt to France or to Spain? Surely not North Carolina, surely not Pennsylvania. We had to have a centralized government, a centralized federal government to be able to handle treaties, taxes, an army, because from about 1785 till about 1789, we were vulnerable on the side of the world. The army had disbanded. I had relinquished my sword at Annapolis. That's where Congress was hiding out. We had difficulty, didn't we, Martha? Always trying to find out where Congress was. They were always hiding. All the letters we wrote for money, they were hiding in the woods, in Philadelphia, in Boston, here, there, everywhere. They never really wanted to answer. My soldiers need shoes and clothing. Do you remember what I told you, the look, Martha, on their face when I walked in to temporary building there called Congress in Annapolis, and I drew out my sword. And I placed it on the table, and I relinquished my command. Beads of sweat formed on their forehead, and they wiped it going, "That was a close call. That man could have been king. He could have been emperor." At that moment, I had a standing army of 38,000 men who would have gone into hell for me. I was the most powerful man on the face of the earth. And I gave it up. I relinquished my sword. I wanted to go back to Mount Vernon and raise Spanish mules and hogs and cattle. But we have a problem, and that problem was the Articles of Confederation. What are we going to do? They are not working. The world is watching. Do you know the world always will be watching? America. Watching. Who's in charge? What is going on? What is taking place? Transfer of power. It's very important. a good friend of mine, Alexander Hamilton, my adopted son, along with the Marquis de Lafayette. Alexander Hamilton, probably one of the most intelligent men on my staff, came to me with an idea. He got together with John Jay and James Madison, and they had a tremendous idea. 85 papers. And the 85 papers would explain what our Constitution could be based upon, and we called that the Federalist Papers. But we had to get the state of New York to buy into this. 13 of the Federalist Papers were written primarily for the state of New York to bring them on board, because you have to realize the southern states were fighting to hold on to slavery against the northern states that despised slavery. Arguments constantly back and forth between the north and the south. It was a miracle by divine providence that we ever received a Constitution of the United States of America. It went on for months, and it was hot in that room. And they closed the windows. And the flies, the black flies from the blacksmith shop down the road, got buzzing around, and we were drenched in sweat. How long would this agony continue? To form a new Constitution of the United States of America that would be a constitution for all states, explaining executive powers, the legislative powers, the judicial powers, and how each branch is very important, and how each state can have 2 senators, no matter how large the state is, whether it's Pennsylvania or small Massachusetts, they still only get 2 senators. And then Congress, of course, based upon population. But Alexander had it. He nailed it, along with John Jay and James Madison, when they thought that we should attach on the Constitution of the United States a Bill of Rights. A Bill of Rights that every citizen of the United States can always count on. Freedom of speech, never to be interfered with. Freedom of religion, where a Quaker can be a Quaker, Amish can be Amish, a Baptist can be a Baptist, a Catholic can be a Catholic without any interference from the federal government. Freedom of religion. Freedom of the press, where anyone has a right to interpret and to publish. The freedom to bear arms. The freedom of the Second Amendment, not so much that we can run around and everybody can carry a flintlock rifle. The Second Amendment we placed in there to keep the federal government aware we have guns. And there's millions of us, to keep them intact. The right to seizure, to break into your home. All of this Great Britain did to us before we rebelled. Now the federal government has to have due cause to search your house and a warrant for your protection. Do we see now how we went from the Articles of Confederation, confusion, to the United States Constitution that will never, ever change. And as long as we are a republic, we live by that Constitution of the United States. Martha and I have talked about it in our devotions. We have devotions every morning, don't we, Martha? At Mount Vernon, we have devotions at night. We pray for our country. And we always pray that the Constitution of the United States will never, ever be dismembered. And that the federal government will never be politicized with our military and our law enforcement and those who are over us for our protection. And when that happens, do I dare say the Second Amendment might be appropriate to protect our freedoms? I'd like to leave you with Benjamin Franklin. I love that man, don't I? He's such a Dickens. The women love him also. He is a good chess player. I never did beat Benjamin Franklin in chess. You know what Benjamin Franklin told me right after Shays' Rebellion, when people were running through the streets, rioting, burning buildings, breaking into the banks? You remember Shays' Rebellion, don't you? Carrying guns on the street, screaming, beating people up. Anarchy! Anarchy! But the states were too weak. It took Pennsylvania 2 months to raise a militia to put down Shays' Rebellion. Benjamin Franklin said, Mr. Washington, listen up. To do nothing is to do something. To say nothing is to say something. Ladies and gentlemen, please always respect the United States Constitution. Protect it with your life. That is the only, may I say, piece of paper, which is more parchment, that separates you from total anarchy. Do you understand? I am going, I believe now, to turn this over to another president down the road. And I'd like to conclude by saying God bless all of you. God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for that warm Mount Vernon welcome. Before I begin my remarks this evening, I want to let you know that Mrs. Roosevelt is not accompanying me tonight. She is a progressive woman, and she has her own agenda and marches to the beat of her own drummer. And like many of the loyal opposition in Congress, she refuses to listen to her husband, even though he may be President of the United States. So she is out, as my staff puts it, campaigning, and she sends her regards. My first 100 days as President of the United States were filled with a great deal of hectic work. We were facing the largest and most savage depression that had ever occurred in the history of the world. And I knew that we had to hit the ground running in order to make sure that we were doing the right steps, not the steps of my failed predecessor. So I adhered to something that I referred to as the 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. Relief to the people of the United States. 25% of the people of the United States found themselves unemployed, a larger number than had ever happened in the history of the United States. So we had to put people to work. That was our first step. And so we created the Civilian Conservation Corps. And that corps, that group of people, funded by the federal government, were able to put people to work, building roads, building libraries, building swimming pools, building county and state and federal offices throughout the United States in order to give them a job and the respect that they were due. For recovery, we needed to make sure that we were doing things to keep the federal government up and running and make the nation move forward. And so we had things like the National Recovery Act and the banking reform. And so the 3rd R came up, and that was reform. We had to change the way we were doing things. And so we did, with banking reform, with the creation of the Social Security Administration, and the creation of the National Farmers Association. All of these things changed the way government was done. Now, some of my opponents in Congress refer to me as a progressive with a negative connotation. I do not see progressiveness as a negative connotation. I embrace being a progressive with all of my heart. I believe we have to be progressive. We have to constantly move forward and not languish in the failed policies of the past. While I was president, I made sure that the people of the United States knew what their government was doing, unlike anyone before. So we instituted something called the Fireside Chats, where I sat down at a radio speaker and talked to the people of the United States. I did this for one important reason, that if you think about the economy in particular, if you think about that, you can talk to 3 or 4 or 5 different economists and they're never going to agree on anything. And so I made sure that with the Fireside Chats, I was sitting down and explaining to the people of the United States exactly what their government was doing in terms that they could understand. And so we were able to let people know what was happening at a time when it was most important in their lives. I'm going to wrap up my presentation this evening with a little bit of advice. If you are walking around with your chest swelling over some of your accomplishments, just remember that you are only a player in someone else's script. So be sincere, be brief, and be seated. Thank you and good evening.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. According to my father, I am here for 2 reasons. One, I had excellent training from my older brother, Joe, who died suddenly. So the mantle was passed to me. And I was then handed the mantle to become the first ever Irish Catholic President of the United States. The first one born in this century. And also the first Irishman to be elected here in these United States of America. Additionally, I am also a president because I'm a war hero, apparently. People ask me, how did you become a war hero? I had a boat shot out from underneath my ass. Subsequently, I did help my mates make it to an island after swimming 2.5 miles, and we did survive that little incident. But what you see before you is a man devoted, as the rest of the people of my age and my generation, to bringing you a new America. They have passed the mantle to me to make a difference, and I want to remind every American that they are not here to reap the rewards of our hard-working ancestors. We have the greatest country on the planet, and they need to be reminded that it's time to rise to the challenge. And as I said in my inaugural speech, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. We live at a time where simultaneously, for the first time in our history, we can feed every man, woman, and child on this planet if we plan appropriately. We have the farmers and the equipment and the technology to make a huge difference in poverty and hunger across the world. And as I said simultaneously, we can obliterate the planet and change life as we now know it. What are the main issues facing us today? I am fighting a number of wars. The biggest war I'm fighting, of course, is to keep poverty at bay. Poverty and hunger, and show people, as our great God said in the Bible, don't just give a man fish, let's teach him to fish. So I have formed the Peace Corps. I have already rallied more than 5,000 young people and cast them across the world so that they can step up and show people in Africa, South America, and all across the globe how to make a positive difference in their communities as leaders and innovators. We also have to fight communism in this world. I'm not going to call it anything else but an adversary. Russia is a huge adversary, and we have to check them all across the globe. Every opportunity. I've already been faced with a number of those instances, and it was a challenge that had to be met. And I did so. The other thing we need to do is step up our technology, and I need to wake up my friends in Congress and let them know the importance of investing in ourselves and our brains and our ambition in these United States. And before the end of this decade, we will put a manned spacecraft on the moon and return him to Earth. I am devoted to these 3 causes till my dying day. Now, many people are skeptical of how I can accomplish these things. They've even questioned many of my decisions. Many question why I hired my brother Bobby to be Attorney General. Well, he just recently graduated law school, you see, and he needed some experience to go into private practice. I thought, what better way than to be Attorney General? They were also skeptical because of my youth. They're also skeptical because I've crossed the aisle and enlisted many former players in the Eisenhower administration, including former President Dwight Eisenhower himself, because I believe in having the best people on board to help me make the best decisions, both domestically and internationally. And with all these horrible things I've done, at the consternation of many of you great American people, my approval rating in the media is still 85%. I wonder what I can do maybe to pick up a few more points. But I am going to open the floor to questions, as I'm sure we have raised very many, as my peers and I have certainly faced many challenges across these years. Thank you very much, and you may also address questions to my lovely bride, Jacqueline, and Martha Washington.
All you need to do is to say who you would like to answer your question, and to just ask a question and we'll answer. It's quite a bunch. I've never had one this course of one.
President Washington,
Madam, I'm your obedient servant.
thank you. I like what you've been doing. I'm wondering, what is your interpretation of the words in that Second Amendment that say, in an organized militia, the right to bear arms in an organized militia? How do you interpret that?
How do I interpret it?
Hmm?
I think an organized militia is good to keep the federal government in check. How you would interpret the word organized, I would have to think about that. But I do know what happens to countries where, let's say, anarchy prevails, weapons are removed from the public. Let's take, for example, France. Prior to the period of the guillotine, where weapons were confiscated all across France. And then, of course, we realized what happened there with anarchy. I feel that if the French would have been allowed to keep their weapons, probably no bloodshed would have been needed with the revolution. Many people lost their lives. So I would basically say that the Second Amendment is important, and I'm glad that the Constitution put it in there.
If you don't mind, I would like to chime in on what Mr. Washington has said. It reminds me of that question, how many Frenchmen does it take to keep Paris from being invaded? And the answer is, no one knows. They've never been able to do it.
We have to realize that the Founding Fathers, especially with the Federalist Papers, have you read the Federalist Papers? You need to. You need to read the Federalist Papers. And each one deals with a certain structure that eventually becomes the Constitution of the United States. And when the Federalist Papers were written, they realized the stamina, the increase of revolution going on, not in France, but also all across Europe, and how important it was that the public be able to defend themselves. Because, madam, if we do not have any means to defend ourselves and the federal government decides to do this or that or whatever, we are in big doo-doo off a manure wagon. So we have to realize the importance. I think I had no problem with them placing the Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights.
I have a question. Who's up?
You.
Oh. Okay.
Who's on
you
first?
folks haven't been around for a while. President Kennedy, I'm sorry you got cut short on your term. Okay, I would like George Washington to answer the question. You're no dead, right?
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet.
You missed that part.
Oh.
She said.
I'm in the press. I have the freedom. Okay, I would like to ask you, sir, what is the purpose of the National Guard in each state of this country? Is that not a formed militia for the protection of the individual states' rights not to be overrun by people who are not organized?
Well said.
Okay.
Well said. You have no argument.
And I would
with
also
me.
ask the question, did you ever have, you couldn't have imagined what the weapons in the hands of private people who are not organized have. They outgun our police, our National Guard, and to some degree have equal equipment, as equal as is in our armed forces.
Do they outnumber the Sons of Liberty?
I beg your pardon?
The Sons of Liberty.
Yeah?
Do they outnumber the Sons of Liberty?
Understood. The Constitution needs to be able to be changed for the circumstances of the time. There is no document that can be put together that will work in the future. Give us 100 years. What do you think it's going to look like then?
I mean, if I may put this question too as well. I know not what of the tyrannical forces you speak of. However, when you're facing someone like Russia, or as they build missile bases in Cuba, and they're settled on perhaps invading our country, as Japan once did, and people in America took shelter all across this great land because they were afraid of being invaded, which was only a mere, in my lifetime, barely 20 years ago. When is the right time to disarm America? When? When do we know that someone may step onto our soil and our citizens must be required to take up arms and must have that right, as far as I know, where I stand in 1962, sir?
One final thought on that, sir. I am your obedient servant.
Thank you.
When Great Britain came into our country, when King George decided it was time to send 38,000, soldiers into our country, what they first did is they confiscated all the weapons. Why do you think weapons were being hid at Lexington and Concord? We hid our weapons there for a reason, because Great Britain was confiscating our weapons. That is one reason why they were heading toward Lexington and Concord to recover the weapons. So it's extremely important, I think, all down throughout, and I don't know what the future has in store. I don't know what weapons you're talking about. Are you talking about an upgrade in the flintlock rifle? I have no idea. All I know is the Constitution of the United States should always remain the Constitution. If you want changes, you add amendments, okay? But you cannot, am I correct on that, Martha? You cannot alter the Constitution of the United States. You're going to be in trouble. If you want to change the Constitution, then you add amendments, which we have, or will, I'm sorry about that, which we will down there.
Yeah, you will.
I might add that one of the very first things we noticed when Hitler and Mussolini took over their countries, the very first thing they did was disarm the populace. It enabled them to do the atrocities that they have performed unabated, which a well-regulated militia might have stopped.
Sir, I understand that, but I would hope it would be the United States military that wouldn't meet them at the front door. Okay?
That is true.
Do we have any questions about the
Something
personal
else,
lives
you
of
know.
your
I'm sorry, I'm
boss?
taking a second up all the time here.
Good shot.
Yes.
I'd like to know more about.
Is this a question for my beautiful wife, Martha?
It could be. How bad were things at Valley Forge? Because I think we've all forgotten.
Valley Forge, and Martha was there at Valley Forge. Valley Forge will go down into history. And I hope in future studies for our future Americans and children that they realize it wasn't that the temperatures were so cold. The average temperature of Valley Forge was only 32 degrees. All right, 32, 33 degrees. The problem was provisions and supplies, muddy roads, getting the provisions into Valley Forge. And what did I just say about our government? What did I just say about Congress? They're always hiding. We needed money. We needed shoes. We needed shirts. And how many shirts did you organize, ladies there, to make clothing for our soldiers?
Was it 3
It was 300 or 400. I'm telling you, they didn't have shoes. Do you understand? And what did you? Martha said, my general, I can follow your army by the blood and the snow by their feet. So it wasn't the cold temperature at Valley Forge. It was the provisions that could not reach us. And many of my men starved to death. We lost 2,500 men at Valley Forge, primarily from starvation. We lost 5,000 horses. Can you imagine trying to bury a horse in midwinter by digging a hole with a wooden shovel? And so we would pile up the dead horses. We piled up the dead men on the outskirts of the redoubts there at Valley Forge until spring. Then we buried them. So it was terrible, terrible conditions. Not the weather, it was food provisions.
So Mrs. Washington, what did you do while you were out in the field with the troops?
Well, the first thing I did was pack up a big load of supplies and brought those along, so that there were some supplies, but not quite enough. And there was a great deal of camaraderie amongst the officers and the soldiers, and we would dine together, and we would encourage one another. In fact, I think I enjoyed my time at the very dirty and uncomfortable camps than I did once our new nation got started. And we had better living conditions then, but not so much camaraderie and love between people.
May I interject? It was your idea. None of the officers, including yours truly, would engage in the food until all the food was distributed to my soldiers. My soldiers come first. Then the officers, if there was anything left. You did hide a few things out of that Virginia ham.
We did do our best to make merry.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, President Washington.
Well, there are two other presidents here.
And I was president longer than him.
And I would have been president longer than anyone.
Yes, sir. I'm your
Well, you
obedient
could correct him if he gives wrong info.
I'm your obedient servant.
You used the word several times, and I think it was important that you used it. And unfortunately, I think sometimes it gets lost how important the word is. You used the word republic. Could you expand upon that, just how important it is to recognize that we, the United States of America, are a republic?
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect government. The republic stands around those words, we the people. And when we think about the Republic of the United States, and I'm sure the other presidents can make comment too, we the people of the United States, we are referring to all of us here in the room. It doesn't matter whether you're Jewish or Protestant, Italian, Greek, black, white, whatever. We, the
You didn't mention Catholic there, George.
Or Irish.
I was so, from my grave, I was so afraid that we would have a Catholic president. And then America would turn Catholic.
But I was an American first, and people knew that.
They did, Jack. Republic to me stands, we the people of the United States. When Benjamin Franklin answered that question to those two ladies, we have given you a republic controlled by the people. We the people. We're in control, not the federal government. They work for us. All right? They work for us. All right? We don't work for them. We the people, and that's extremely important. And you don't have that in other countries of the world. Mr. Roosevelt, do you have any comment on that, we the people?
Well, it's often confused that we have a democracy. We actually do have a republic. Those people that serve in Congress, as you said, work for us. I am employed as President of the United States at the whim and the will of the people of
Amen.
the United States. And when my term is up, I will hand over the reins to someone else who is chosen by those people to take over and do the job that I was doing. And it has been that way for centuries. And I hope, God willing, that it will continue to be that way forever.
Amen. Jack, do you have any thoughts?
Well, sir, my biggest concerns are to the threats around the globe, and that's why we have a responsibility to step forward and not allow changes to people's freedoms and lives and ability to pursue happiness. Every person on the globe has the right to liberty. Liberty that we enjoy here in this great land. And communism will kill that dream all around the globe. We've seen it time and time again, and we must stand forward to stamp it out.
President Roosevelt, you met Winston Churchill. What was it like?
Well, it was quite like standing and watching a hurricane coming at me. One of my favorite quotes of Winston's was when he was making a point on the floor of Parliament, and one of his own supporters crossed the aisle to sit with the opposition. And in true Winston Churchill form, he said, "This is the first time I've ever seen a rat run toward a sinking ship." Winston was a formidable person, but he was prime minister at the right time. Very few people know that Winston confided in me at the end of World War II. He said, "Franklin, the one thing we need to do now," and Jack will appreciate this, "we need to keep our armies in Europe and conquer Russia, because that will be the biggest threat we will face in the future." And he was oh so right.
I had the pleasure to meet Mr. Churchill myself after he had been Prime Minister. I was very excited about our meeting. We were on a yacht together, and I will let my lovely bride Jackie finish this story, as I just finished my conversation with Mr. Churchill.
We had been invited to a very nice yacht by Mr. Onassis. And Winston Churchill was there, and he was a lovely man, but unfortunately he was getting to the end of his life. And he was a bit deaf, a bit blind. And as Jack and I left, Jack had conversations with the former Prime Minister. And as we left, Jack was a bit sad, because you see, Winston is his hero. And he didn't quite get the interaction that he had hoped. Well, I explained to Jack as we left that Winston actually thought that Jack was the waiter. And he couldn't quite understand why the waiter was sitting down having dinner with him and asking all of these questions. And you see, Jack had decided that day to wear a white jacket instead of a black tux.
What was he drinking?
Don't ask those questions.
Winston Churchill.
Don't ask those questions either.
Generally, anything you sat in front of.
I think he was a bit put out that I, as the waiter, had offered him a cigar as well. It was just an awkward exchange.
But he probably didn't refuse the cigar.
As a matter of fact, he didn't.
Any other questions for the characters? Our
Are there any questions for the actors themselves? I'm going to give this little kind of plug. All of the people that are up here on stage tonight have graciously not only come tonight and in March, but they will also be doing another character this year. And so I just encourage you to come. Are there any questions for us? It could be about why we chose these characters or why we do what we do.
Next month is the 11th.
Yes.
I will
sure.
be doing Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, of course, was a Lutheran pastor. He could have stayed in America, but he chose to go back to Germany, and he realized that would be basically his death by Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler hated Dietrich Bonhoeffer because he spoke up, but we'll be going into depth on his stand against the Nazis, the Jewish situation of the final solution, and of course all the way up to where he was hung at Flossenburg with piano wire because of his stand against Hitler.
Did you think about coming in a wheelchair?
We had quite a discussion about that.
We had a wheelchair in March.
We had a wheelchair when we did it in March. Have you ever been to the FDR Memorial in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, it's been
Okay. There is a statue of FDR with Fala, his dog, and FDR is wearing a cape that flows very gracefully over his wheelchair. You will find very, very, very few, if any, public photographs of FDR in a wheelchair. One of the things that very few people know is that the president's desk, and every president chooses the desk he uses, but most presidents choose the Resolute desk, which was made by Queen Victoria out of the pieces left of the HMS Resolute and was shipped to America as a gift. And it had an open panel in the front. Her thinking was that a man likes to stretch out. Well, FDR had a panel put in place, so the press would never see his leg braces when he was sitting down. They could never tell from here down that he was sitting in a wheelchair at the president's desk. That is the very same Resolute desk where there's a picture of John Kennedy.
It's over there, on the table.
Sticking his head out through that opening that FDR covered up.
We had a wicker wheelchair, Robert, from Mansfield that was very appropriate to the period. I still had it as recently as yesterday. I called Ken on Monday and I said, Ken, are we using a wheelchair or not? Because I can probably keep it one more day.
We would have never gotten it through that door.
And Ken said, and let him, I don't even have to
Well, no,
quote it.
you tell him, because I'm going to say something totally different.
Well,
It's so much fun.
he said most people, even after he spoke, didn't know he was in a wheelchair, so let's just do it this way. So he walked with a cane and carried himself to the podium.
Well, and you have to realize FDR, people heard him, but the vast majority of the Americans never saw FDR. They saw photographs of him, totally staged, but they never saw FDR. The way we are today, inundated with I mean, if President Biden passes gas, we know it in an hour. I mean, it's ridiculous. But FDR was in an era, and so was Kennedy to a very large degree, where we could control the message that went out. The presidents could control the message that went out. That all went out the window. That everything about the presidency changed.
And no one's asked me about John F. Kennedy's cane and my struggle to get out of here.
Well, I know about it. So
I asked.
A lot of folks don't, in that he was highly medicated due to his Addison's disease, which the public did not know about. His father, Joe, when John F. Kennedy came home from Europe after the war, just told everyone he needed to rest because he'd had malaria. Well, he'd had Addison's disease. They also were going to try to repair the damage to his back from his incident on the PT boat, but they couldn't do surgery because they were afraid he was going to die during surgery. He was in the hospital for 2 months. They decided to go ahead and do the surgery, and he got a staph infection, nearly did die, so he had to convalesce a little longer. Then they did finally do the surgery again. John was in severe pain the rest of his life and was under extreme medication, was frequently helped to the podium, or before he came out, he was shot full of drugs so he could walk to the podium, present to the press, and then retreat to his office and get more medication. That's the reality.
Is that when he wrote Profiles in Courage?
When he was in the after his surgery.
Did you write it or did Jackie?
Oh, Jackie didn't, but you know, the authorship is a little sketchy.
That's what you get when you marry a strong-willed woman.
I stayed out of it. It was.
I'm gonna stand over here.
I'm not afraid of your wife. I'm afraid of my wife. The other reason I didn't want the wheelchair is because it would look strange for Jackie or Martha Washington to push me out here. And I don't have the strength in my arms to move the thing. I tried.
We're a wheelchair.
Oh, heavens, I'd have been sitting over there going around in circles. Doing donuts.
And we would have let him because it would have been really, really funny.
Let's see, what day is it? Humiliate Ken Day.
So that Ken is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. We'll just tell you who we're going to be.
And I will be Abigail Adams in September, I think?
Yes, September, like 14th maybe.
And in November, I am going to reprise my role of Red Skelton.
If you didn't see it before, I mean, I know it'll be different. He is amazing.
It's a lot of fun.
He's amazing.
It's a lot of fun.
Could you introduce the actors
Oh,
up here?
sure. Start down there with Ken.
Ken Hammontree, right there.
Ken Hammontree.
I have brochures over there. I do 28 historical characters. I have no idea who I am.
I'm Raylene Halafity. I do 9 characters now, including Jane Austen, who I did at the other series.
Yeah, and
last
Beatrix
fall.
Potter.
And
She knows who she is.
Fanny Crosby and Beatrix Potter. And who else? Rose O'Neill Greenhow, Confederate Spy. That's a fun one. She's feisty.
Just like Riley.
And I am Ken Barnett, and I have for the past 45 years done a one-man show of Mark Twain. So he and I are very, very, very well acquainted. For the Chautauqua, I have done Red Skelton. I have done Jonathan Winters, and I did Dame Edna Everidge.
It was so good.
Which was a whole lot of fun, except I forgot my shoes. There you go.
And he couldn't wear mine.
And I am Jim Stoner, and in August I'm going to reprise my role as Frank Sinatra. I've performed as Frank literally dozens of times across the Midwest and had a couple of standing dates at Malabar Farm as well as the Blue Barn Winery here in Central Ohio. And Amy will likely be joining me as Ava, and we perform as a divorced couple. I've done a number of characters as well. I think on last count I was at 28. But I've only done about 5 of them more than once. But I really enjoy stretching myself, everything from Will Rogers to Edgar Allan Poe to Robin Williams to John Lennon to John F. Kennedy.
And Bonnie and Clyde.
And Bonnie and Clyde, which was really a lot of fun. I'm Amy K. Stoner, and along with Jim, Madcap is our brainchild. I also have over 20 characters. I'll be doing Laura Ingalls Wilder this year. And she is one of my favorite characters to do. I grew up with those books, and making the difference between reality and, you know, real Laura and Laura of the books, is a fun jaunt. She'll be coming in July, I think.
And we certainly hope you all continue to join us and help spread the words that the series, the Living History series presented by Madcap, is alive and well and going forward. So we're counting on you.
Take as many flyer sketches as you want. Have a great evening. Joy, we'll be here for just a few minutes, and then we're going to go get pictures taken upstairs.
And have another cup of coffee.
Here.
Compliments.